Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon for practice interview questions. We're going to receive a brief refresher on the key skills that are required when interviewing for any job. And then the bulk of this session will be spent on practicing interview questions with volunteers from the audience. And this is led by MJ Kahn, who's the SVP of Technology at OpFocus. And she's a seasoned Toastmasters member and leader. As an active Toastmaster for nearly 20 years, MJ is an ardent fan of Toastmasters as a way to build self-confidence and improve communication and leadership skills. During her time in the organization, she has earned numerous educational awards, competed in a variety of speech contests, and held many leadership positions in both her clubs and her larger Toastmasters organization. So all 17 of us, let's give a big virtual round of applause to MJ for being with us this afternoon. And MJ, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Robert, thank you so much. I'll share my screen and we'll start going through content in just a minute, but I'm curious. Robert said this is the sort of unplanned, originally part 2 of the part 1 session that we did a few weeks ago. I can't really see everybody's hands just with the view that I have. So could I ask you, if you were able to attend the last session, if you were there, put yes into the chat. If you weren't there, put no. I'm just curious to see sort of what percentage of people here were in that last session. Yes, if you were here, no, if you weren't here a few weeks ago. My rough count is about equal, a little heavier on the nose, which is fine. For those of you who were here before, sit tight. It's not going to be an exact rerun of the last time. But what I'll say before I start sharing the screen is my name is MJ Kahn. I am the SVP of Technology at OpFocus. We're a Salesforce.com partner, a consulting company, if that means anything to any of you. The main reason I mention all of that is to say that I am not a job coach. I'm not an interview coach. I'm not somebody, frankly, who really enjoys the job search process myself. I just celebrated my 14th anniversary at the current company, my current company. What I am is somebody, as Robert said, a Toastmaster. And I will explain a tiny bit of what Toastmasters is as we're talking. But the main point that I want to get across is that with so many things in the professional world and so many things in the interviewing world, it's all about communication skills. And that's the main thing that we're going to focus on today is communication skills, whether you get them from Toastmasters or you get them from other means. Let me see if I can get to the share my screen. Move you over here where I can keep an eye on you all. And what we're doing today is a little bit of what I did, a little review of what we talked about 3 or so weeks ago. And it's all about impromptu speaking, which is what interviewing is all about. My agenda for today is, I promise, no more than 2 minutes on Toastmasters. I did way too much last time. We'll do 2 minutes on Toastmasters. I think it's important for you to know about. And the main thing that we'll do is a review from last time of some thoughts about how to answer interview questions, how to think about the question that you've been asked, how to think about what you want to give as a response, and then how to organize the response you give. And really, the main thing we're going to do today is practice those skills. So I'll go through some education, and then we'll do a live question and answer session where you'll practice your answers, and we'll then give you feedback on the answers that you give to a bunch of interview questions. So that's the plan. The 2 minute, somebody can set a stopwatch if you want to. Toastmasters, it's the main reason that I came here in the first place. It's the main reason I was introduced to you all. Toastmasters is an international organization in which people meet in local clubs to work on communication skills and leadership skills. The way it works is that you go to a local club meeting and you see people deliver, and you can, as a member, deliver a speech that you've prepared, usually 5 to 7 minutes in length. And then right away, you get feedback from the audience on your speech. If you've ever given a speech at work and you have asked somebody after how it went, the answer inevitably is, oh, it was fine. And in Toastmasters, you'll get so much more than that. You'll get real meaningful feedback that will make you a better communicator. There's also an opportunity to do impromptu speaking. So you're asked a question, you answer it just as happens in an interview setting. Membership in Toastmasters looks good in a resume. It looks like you're working to improve yourself, and that's another reason why I mention it here. I encourage you to learn more about Toastmasters. Go to toastmasters.org. You can email me. I'll put my email address up at the end as well. And just find out more about it. Visit a club as a guest and see if you like it. I highly recommend it. But now I'm going to stop talking about Toastmasters, and instead, let's talk about some interviewing techniques, some things to think about when you're interviewing and when somebody asks you a question. The first thing when somebody asks you a question in the context of an interview, the first thing that I would like you to do is to think about, why did they ask you that question? There is rarely a question that is asked in an interview setting in which the interviewer doesn't have a purpose. They ask you that question for a reason. And the first thing you really need to do is to figure out, what is it that they're trying to learn? And then the next thing you need to figure out is, well, you know what they want to learn. What do you want them to learn? Because those two things may be subtly different from each other. So, for example, if somebody asks you, well, why are you leaving your current position? What they may want to learn is, did you have problems in your last position? Are you likely to bring those problems into your new position? What are the things that you're looking for in a new position? That's the kind of thing that the interviewer is probably asking about. You, as the interviewee, want to give them the answer, but you want to temper the answer a little bit. You probably don't want to tell them, well, the reason I'm leaving my current position is because it's a hellhole. You don't really want to go there. Think about what you want them to learn, what you want to share, what you don't want to share. This particular question, you don't want to give the impression that you're leaving a bad experience, you're running away from something. You want to give them the impression that you're running towards something. So somebody were to ask me, why am I leaving my current position? I might say something like, well, I really enjoyed the time that I spent at my company. Might have been a hellhole, not going to say that. Really enjoyed the time that I've spent there. I feel like I've learned a lot from the experience and I've contributed a lot. But what I've learned is that if I want to continue to grow in my career and continue to contribute to my employers, I'm probably going to have to do that at a different company. And that's why I'm really interested in the position here at Acme Corporation. So they're asking why you're leaving. You're thinking about what they want to learn from you, and you are conveying the message that you want them to get in response to the question. Does that sound reasonable? I'll take silence as a yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. That's the hardest part about a large group session, is that I can only see about 5 faces at a time. All right, that's the first set of questions for you to ask yourself every time somebody asks you an interview question. What do they want to learn? What do you want them to learn? The next thing is to think about, how are you going to organize your answer? As an engineer myself, whenever I'm talking with somebody else, whether it's in an interview context or even in a meeting kind of context, I listen to what somebody says in terms of its organizational structure. If it's an organized answer, to me, it's a really good indication of an organized mind. And so to me, and I think to a lot of people, it's really important to have an organized approach to how you phrase your answer to any question. There are two main types of questions that you tend to get asked. One is a situational or a behavioral question, and the other is basically not that. A situation or behavioral question is one like, tell me about a time when you did this, or how would you handle a situation if this were to happen to you? In both of those scenarios, they're asking about a situation, and your goal is to tell them a story about how you handle the situation. If you answer it in the hypothetical, well, I've never run into this situation, but here's what I'd imagine I'd do, they don't really learn so much, because everybody usually knows what you should do in a situation. But if you can give your answer to how you handled something similar in the past, it's going to make your answer so much more real. It's going to be a much better predictor for how you'll behave in that workplace. So if you get a behavioral question, there is a technique you can use called the STAR approach. STAR is an acronym. It means situation, task, action, and result. The situation is the context of the scenario. It's sort of the introduction to the story that you're going to tell. What was it that was happening? The task is, what was your responsibility? What was the job you were supposed to perform? The action, what did you actually do? Now you've sort of set it up with the S and the T. The action, what did you actually do? And then really importantly, what was the result of the action that you took? So, for example, if somebody says, tell me how you would manage a difficult client. I'm a consultant. That tends to be a question that I might ask somebody interviewing at my company. Think about, first of all, why are they asking the question? What do they want to learn? How do you handle difficult interpersonal situations, for example? How do you handle potentially uncomfortable situations? And sorry, I've got my phone is making all sorts of noise in the background. So think about what they want to learn. Think about what you want to tell them. You want to convey the message that you will confront a difficult situation head on, thoughtfully, productively. So if they say, tell me how you would handle a difficult client, if I go with the STAR technique, I would give a situation like, well, I had a client who was really difficult on an interpersonal level. Anything that we did, anything my project team did for her was just, it was never enough. And even when we went way out of our way to work nights and weekends for this client, she never really seemed to appreciate what we were doing. She was always unhappy. It was really demoralizing for the team. That's the situation. The task would be, well, I was the project manager on this project. I was leading a team of 3 people at my end. And we were about to start a new phase of this project. And I needed to keep my team motivated, even though this client had seemed so unappreciative of everything that we'd done for her in the past. I knew I needed to do something to change the dynamic. That's the task. The action, well, at the end of the last phase of the project, I met with the client one-on-one without anybody else from her end or my end. And I spoke with her about the challenges we'd faced previously and all of the hard work that my team had put in to address those challenges. What I learned is that I don't think she was really aware of all of the work that we had done on her behalf. That's the action that I took. I had this discussion. I updated the client on everything that we'd done. And then the result, as a result of our conversation, the client was much better able to understand the lengths we were willing to go to meet her needs. And she really began to trust us a lot more. The end result was that not only was the follow-on project successful, but she came back to us for even more work. So a little bit of a long answer, but that's the STAR technique. Talk about a situation that's similar to the question that was asked, the task at hand, the action that you took to address the situation to get the task performed, and then the result of that action. That's the STAR technique, and it can be really helpful in dealing with situational kinds of questions. So far, so good? All right, I'm going with yes. All right. All right, thank you very much. All right, what if it isn't a situational kind of question? Somebody says, what does your ideal company look like? Or what are your pet peeves? It's really kind of hard to come up with a situation for some of those things. So you can go with the same kind of approach you probably learned in high school English class, which is opening, body, and conclusion. It's a tried and true way of organizing an answer. In the opening, you set the stage, you set the tone, you give a brief preview of the main point that you're about to talk about. In the body, you give the main point of what you want to talk about. And then in the conclusion, that's your last sentence or two in response to this question. And that's where you want to give the key takeaway of what you're going to say. So if somebody says, what are you looking for in a new position? Opening might be, well, a lot of people have helped me over the course of my career, and I've learned a lot from them. I really want to have the opportunity to pay that forward. So you've kind of set a theme for what you're going to be talking about. In the body, you might say, well, in my last job, I had the privilege of working on a team with a really strong manager. That manager gave me a lot of opportunities to mentor less experienced team members. And he really mentored me as well. He let me take responsibility for certain parts of the project. And I learned a lot from that experience. In the conclusion, the key takeaway that you want to give is that you want to pay this forward. You want to be a mentor to the people on the team that you might be taking responsibility for in this new position. So I've learned so much from the people that I've worked with. It would give me a lot of personal satisfaction to feel like I can pay that forward by being a mentor to some of the people that I would be working with here. I'd like to do that in a way that benefits both the people on my team and the company overall. So you give the opening, body, and conclusion, the main thing you want to talk about, the guts of what you're going to say, and then at the end, the key takeaway, the last message that you want them to get from your response to that question. Regardless of whether you use the STAR approach or whether you use this opening, body, conclusion approach, there are some things to think about. You do want to think about, why did they ask the question? What do they want to get out of the answer? What do you want them to get from your answer? You want to think about how you're going to organize your answer. And there are other tools that you can and should apply. Whether you're in a Zoom setting like this or you're sitting across the table from people, there's a lot of tools that can be used. One is use personal stories, not overly personal, but personal professional stories, because those stories really punctuate the point. They will make you different and more memorable than other people and their stories. Use your voice, whether it's in a Zoom setting, especially in a Zoom setting, but also in person. Use your voice. Pause before and after you make an important point. Speak a little bit more quickly when you're really excited about what you're saying, and a little more slowly when you really want to emphasize something. Change the volume, change the pitch. I work with a fellow who speaks in a monotone. Everything he says is in a monotone. He says gold. Everything he says is really good. It's really great stuff, but it's just in a monotone. And it makes me sick to listen to him because he knows so much, but he can't get it across because it's such a monotone. Use your voice to punctuate and emphasize what you're saying. Use your body language as well, whether it's in a Zoom session or in person. Use your gestures, use your facial expressions to punctuate what you're saying to make it more real. Use eye contact. You might notice that I'm occasionally glancing down at my slides, but I'm primarily looking at my camera. And I actually, to remind me to look at my camera, Teddy sits right behind my camera. And he reminds me to make eye contact with him, which means it looks like I'm making eye contact with you in a Zoom setting, even if in reality, your pictures are kind of off to the side. Let's put Ted back up there. Okay. And finally, I won't go into details about Zoom setup. There are all sorts of articles out there on the internet about camera level and where your eye level should be relative to where your camera is, and lighting and background and things like that. If you're doing a Zoom interview, do what I did, close the door, don't let the kiddies in the office, and make eye contact and make sure that your Zoom setup is comfortable for you. Okay, I've talked a lot, and we now have time for a practice session. So here's how this is going to work. At a high level, I'm going to ask some sample questions. I'll ask you to answer a question. I'll ask for a volunteer, and then any of us here will have the opportunity to give feedback on that answer. So this is a give and take. When you give feedback, a couple of quick notes. Be positive. So that sucks, not a good bit of feedback. Be constructive. Everything was great. Not really very constructive. You're not giving them something they can learn from it. Be specific. I liked it when you said X. I thought this was a really good story that you told. Be specific about it, and speak to how you experience the answer as a listener, as a potential interviewer. And finally, if you really want to get fancy in Toastmasters, we talk about the sandwich approach, in which you say something positive, something constructive, something that they could consider doing differently, and then you end it on a positive note. When you're getting the feedback, I encourage you to take notes. I encourage you to listen, but don't respond. The feedback session is not the time for you to explain why you answered the way you did, because you'll never have a chance to do that in an interview. It's the time to hear what a potential interviewer might think of your answer. And remember that everything that you hear is just one person's opinion. It's not what every interviewer might think. It's just what the one person who's giving you feedback might think. All right, here's how it's going to work. Just a second, we'll start. I will ask you a question. You'll have a couple of seconds to think about the answer. If you want to volunteer, post in the chat, because I won't see hands go up. Post in the chat, I volunteer. I'll call on a volunteer. You'll have 2 or 3 minutes to answer the question. You might, in reality, you might take a little bit more than that in an interview, but we want to get more people in. Then after you've given your answer, everybody should be listening closely, because then I'll call on people who want to give feedback. So if you want to give feedback, say, I have feedback, put that into the chat. I'll call on people to give feedback. Remember those tips for giving feedback. And after we've kind of exhausted the feedback, I'll move on either to the next volunteer or to the next question. And if there's more that you want to say, you can always private chat the speaker. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. So let's go. Oh, one more thing. I'm sorry, the 2 to 3 minutes. In Toastmasters, I think Elaine knows this. In Toastmasters, we use timing cards. When you hit 2 minutes, you'll see this part of the screen turn green. When you hit 2.5 minutes, so you've only got 30 seconds left to go, it will turn yellow. When you've hit 3 minutes, it will turn red. And if you keep talking, I'm going to stop you and interrupt you, because we really only have 2 to 3 minutes for this. Ready? First question. Why are you leaving your current position? Think about what they want to learn. What do you want them to learn? Think about whether this is a situational question or an opening body conclusion question. I saw Elaine volunteer. Elaine, you want to go for it?
Certainly. Well, I haven't left. They left me. I was part of the larger tech layoff in August. When I went back, I came home, I cried, and then I went right immediately to job searching, and I noticed that I was joined by thousands and thousands of people laid off in August as part of restructuring, but largely tech layoff. So I was laid off. 25% of my company was laid off, some really awesome people. So I don't take it personally. It's just the industry. And I'm really looking forward to the next challenge. I did robots for a year and I super enjoyed that. And if they hadn't laid me off, I'd still be playing with the robots.
All right, I got 32 seconds. That's fine, short is fine. Does anybody have any
I'm
feedback?
a tech writer. It's all about the short.
It's awesome. Does anybody have any feedback they'd like to share with Elaine about that answer? If you do, you can either start speaking, but unmute yourself or we'll never know. Or post in the chat. Awesome. Let's start with Anne.
Hi, I have some feedback. This is Anne. I thought it was great, Elaine, to hear your positive outlook and your sharing of your feelings. You enjoyed what you were doing. You went home and cried, and then you started, picking yourself up and looking again. Oh, now I have to come up with something constructive. That's harder.
I talk too fast and I go too quickly. There we go. That's unusual.
I know. No, I'm not used to this part. I'm trying to think of something. I did really appreciate it. And maybe I didn't hear about what you were looking for next. And I don't know if that was asked.
That was, yep. Got it.
But overall, I really appreciated it. And I thought you did a good job looking at the camera and speaking concisely.
All right, so Elaine is going to mute herself now. And we're just going to hear from people who are giving feedback. And the next person was, is it Jana? Am I saying it right?
Yes, that's correct. I had more of a question about what she said, wondering if a woman should say she cried. It makes me nervous to hear somebody say that, because even though I cry, I don't know if men like to hear you say that they cry. Or that's a question I have. And that's not necessarily I don't mean it to be negative. It's more of a question if that's acceptable.
Yeah.
Advised.
It's a really good question. I'm not going to try to answer it here, except to say that you always need to read your audience. It really depends on who you're talking to. You may or may not know the interviewer well enough to know how they would respond to that. I think you could say, I went home and was really disappointed. I went home and ate a chocolate, an ice cream sundae, and that made me feel better. There are ways of dealing with it. If you're in a room full of, excuse me, I'll say this because I'm in this category, 60-plus-year-old men, not the man part, but the age part, and they're all wearing three-piece business suits, maybe that's not the place to talk about crying, but I think it really depends on the audience.
But that's, I don't think I would do well in a 60-plus three-piece suit thing. Yep. So yep. Part of being, I was emotional for like 20 minutes, and yep. then I picked myself up,
exactly, and then you got productive. Yeah, right. Exactly. Excuse me. Gail put into the chat, I want to acknowledge, and Cindy agreed that she liked that Elaine said that she didn't take it personally. And I think that's a really important message. I would say my own thought was that while I liked what you did say about having been laid off, and I've been laid off a few times myself, I think maybe you lingered a little long in the layoff. In a real interview setting, you would know the position you were interviewing for, and I would encourage you to spend maybe 2/3 of your answer on what you're looking for, what encourages you, what excites you about the new position. So they asked about why you're leaving.
But that wasn't the question.
That's right. But they're asking why are you leaving, and what they want to learn is, are there issues or challenges or things that you might, this is what I assume. This is why when I ask the question, why are you leaving? I want to know what baggage are they bringing with them to the new job.
Because I was on the assumption that if not all, most of us are active job seekers who do not currently have jobs or are underemployed.
But even then, why did you leave your last position? They want to know something about your job history. And the fact that you would have stayed there very happily and productively if you'd been given the opportunity, I think is an important message. So you need to answer. You can't avoid the question. Yeah. But I think you can also spin it to say, what are the reasons that they're asking? They want to know what baggage you're bringing, and what you want to tell them, what you want them to understand is, yeah, stuff happened on the last job, but I'm really psyched about this job. And
all right, so
I think you can use
even if they're trying to poke, you're saying even if they're trying to find out, what snakes did you bring in your bag with you? You're all about you're the most beautiful person in the world, and that's who I want.
Not all, because you do need to answer their question. I think as a rough guideline, you could spend no more than half of the time talking about the past. The past is that way. No more than half, maybe even just 1/3 of the time, and the rest of the time talking about what really applies to them, which is why you're excited about the new position. Especially when it's a layoff, I think what you said about how you felt about it, and then how you picked yourself up, dusted yourself off, and moved forward is an important message. But I don't think that's the only message that you might want to give in response to that question.
Okay.
Does anybody else want to? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry.
Okay. Does anybody else want to try that question? I'm looking in the chat, going once, going twice. Nothing more in the chat. Let's click through the timings. I didn't have a chance to do that. And we've done feedback. And so let's try another question. And I'm looking for another volunteer. What motivates you? Does anybody want to volunteer for what motivates you? All right, the longer we spend in silence, the less productive we're being. Does this question just not really speak to anybody?
I can volunteer. This is Anne.
Anne, yes.
Hi. So I would say what motivates me is feeling productive, that I'm making a difference, that I'm collaborating with the team. I do quality assurance, and I like to, and by nature, I'm kind of a perfectionist, but I also appreciate that we all make mistakes and we're a team. And so I try to get to root causes and help people, not just to point out what's wrong, but sort of try and pinpoint what's going on and how I can help assist in making things right.
All right. Another one, 32 seconds, which is fine. You don't have to go all the way to 2 minutes. You do in table topics and Toastmasters, but not here. Anybody have any feedback? Elaine has some feedback for Ann. Don't forget to unmute.
There I am. I am unmuted. I like, the part I like the best is how she said that she just doesn't say, hey, this is wrong, but she goes into why this is wrong. And the part that I would say, much like myself, she was short. And I think an example of what she did, like in a situation where she found a problem and how she solved it with the help of the other person.
Yeah, I agree. I like the points that Ann made. I think even though this isn't a situational kind of question, I think a short story in there might make it more real and more memorable for the audience. Anybody else have any feedback? Bill says, I understand that the leaving question is an out-of-the-box question, but I wonder if the interviewer is even prepared to interview candidates or read my resume. Let's save that towards a little bit towards the end. Resume doesn't always say why somebody left, and it's the color behind the answer that I might look for in that sort of setting. And a resume often doesn't say that somebody was laid off. Yeah, Elaine says she's shocked at how often an interviewer hasn't read her resume. I can't speak for all interviewers. I haven't done much interviewing in the last year or two, but I did a lot prior to that. And I mean, I pore over the resume, I pore over the LinkedIn profile. I come up with a page and a half of questions because I'm a detail-oriented kind of person. But yeah, I understand a lot of people haven't, but if I'm going to spend the time out of a busy schedule interviewing somebody, I'm going to spend the time to learn about them from other sources before I actually speak with them. But not everybody does that. And not everybody has the time or sadly the interest to do that. And anybody else have feedback for Ann? And I'm wondering if you had a story that you could tell. Can you think of a story that you might tell about a time when you were motivated and when you were really productive?
So my most recent job was with TrueFit, which was doing sizing, advising people to buy the shop online, whether to go up and down a size. And when they first introduced children's sizing, there were some issues that had to do with if you had somebody that was perhaps a slim, a 6 slim, it was going down to a 2. And I realized some of the people that had done that were not as experienced with children's sizes. And so I brought up the point of, the sleeves will be too long, the pants, that's too short, that sort of thing. So what I did in that case was, bring it back to those people and sort of go up a level. And as a result, we came up with a new way of limiting what the choices would be, what the results would be.
I love that you got as a result in there, because I think that's awesome. I think you could add one more sentence at the end about having that kind of success really motivates me, or having that kind of an impact on a situation, or knowing I'm making it easy for the shoppers who are my customers is what motivates me.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
But yeah, no, you're welcome. Thank you. Appreciate your volunteering. Anybody else want to talk about what motivates them? Answer this question?
Yes, I want to be a volunteer.
Smita, go for it.
Yeah, actually, I really like this question. Like, what motivates you? And yeah, if I have something something new to learn, which I don't ever learn, and that is really gets me to motivate to do something. And I am really a good organized person, so it's not that difficult for me to learn new things. And if it is there something new to learn, then I will get more organized and then I will get more productive. And since I'm not working here anywhere, but I am a housewife and I am mom of 2 kids, so motivation is really needed for me every day to wake up, next day. So if I have something new even for kids, if I find something new book to read them, or for myself, I really get motivated. So yeah, every day I have to, for motivates me as a person, I really want something to new in my way, so that, I can really organize myself good, and I can get that, creativity or something really nice time to spend with it. So yeah, that's what motivates me.
Smita, awesome. Thank you very much for that. And who's got feedback for her?
I was wondering, you talked about working with your son's school, did you? Is that what, Smita, did you mention that?
What?
Did you mention working with your son's school?
Yeah, like I am not right now, I'm not working anywhere, but yeah, I am a mom of 2 kids. One is 12 and one is 6. So I'm working with them, like their homework, for reading them, or, day-to-day activities.
Okay. So I think that's a good thing to mention. However, I'd never say that I'm not working, because you are working. No such thing as a non-working mom, Mm-hmm. And sometimes we get into that thing of saying, you're not working, but what you're doing is important work. I wonder if MJ would agree with me that.
Yeah, I put down on my first thought is Jana's going to have a comment about the term housewife. Since you talked about crying before, or using the term crying. Yeah, I think you could, these days you say I work from home, and it could mean all sorts of things. So you might say, these days, or most recently, I'm working from home with or working at home with my kids, or my children have been my primary job, but I'm really excited about going back to the workplace, something like that. Yeah, you're definitely working. I'm the mother of cats, and I know how much work it is. I can only imagine being the mother of kids and how much work that is. I liked that you talked about, approaching each day with finding something to motivate you. I wonder, you mentioned that you're a lawyer earlier. Have you worked in law, either here or back home?
Actually, no. Because as soon as I completed my degree, I got married, and then I am just moving here and there in different countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about, I'm thinking about a story. And if you don't have a workplace story, you don't want to say too much about stories at home, because while some of that can be really good in terms of organizational skills and how you approach challenges, I don't think you want to emphasize the home too much, because you don't want them thinking that that's going to be your focus when you start working with them. But I wonder if you could talk about something that motivated you in school, maybe a school project or a paper or a particular aspect of law, and get a little bit more specific about what might motivate you in the workplace. I like that you talked about motivation is important to you, but I'm thinking in terms of what they want to learn, they want to know, are they going to be able to motivate you on this job, and how?
Okay. I will keep in mind.
Well, I'll come back to the main thing in just a couple of minutes. Should we do one or two more? All right, let's see. We're going to zip past the timing cards. All right, tell me about a time you learned a new skill. Anybody want to volunteer for that? Tell me about a time you learned a new skill. So what is it that they want to learn about you? I would think as an interviewer, I might want to know, how do you approach learning something? Are you expecting other people to teach you? Are you a self-starter? If you get stuck, will you ask for help? Anybody have an answer to that one? If it doesn't speak to anybody, we can move on to another question. Somebody say something.
I could wax poetic about the robots, but that's the past.
Well, but this is a perfect situation for a star kind of response because it's about a situation. So in that, you could talk about a situation. The company had just released a new robot and we needed documentation for it. Situation, my task, my job was to produce an end user manual that was going to be clear to end users while still conveying all the technical detail. Here's what I did, here's the result.
Actually, so, MJ, this is my prime star story because the guy who was in charge of all the engineers didn't want to document it. So I was engaged to document something that he didn't allow the engineers to tell me things. And a few of them actually said, Elaine, I'm sorry, I can't tell you anything. But I was able to do a lot with the technicians because the engineer was the lead engineer VP dude was a bit of a snob. And he told the engineers to tell me not to tell me anything, but he didn't tell the technicians. So I was able to get most of it done without him.
So it's a really good story, but what I'm getting from the story is you had a problem with the engineering manager and you might have a problem with the engineering manager at my company.
Yeah, no,
yeah. So how might you rephrase that story?
Well, I'm trying to do it in the 3 seconds.
I
wrote it. I had an interview with Amazon. As part of the interview, I wrote this story up, and it's it had to be a certain length, so it's 2.5, 3 pages. I've really, to this day, no one has been able to figure out why he had said not to tell. Not anything because the customer, he ended up leaving. And while I was able to get a good solid basis before he left, as soon as he left, the customer, a fairly like Fortune 10 company said, yeah, we don't trust you anymore. Cough up the dock ASAP. And so what ended up happening is all the engineers who couldn't tell me anything had to write their first drafts. And then I cleaned up there because we had to get it to the customer quickly.
It's a really good story because it can be used to answer a lot of different questions.
Yeah.
In the context of learning a new skill, I think you could say that we had a need to produce documentation on this technology really quickly. I didn't get a lot of support from the manager who was responsible for it, so I had to take these steps in order to learn it well enough to be able to document it. But I was able to work with the engineers and get the documentation produced.
Okay.
So yeah,
thank you.
And focusing less on what roadblocks this jerk was throwing in your way, because you don't want to convey that kind of a message to them. You do want to say, there were challenges. That the manager was not necessarily forthcoming, but I was able to work with blah 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 to make it work. Nicole, I know you sent this to me individually, but I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. You said questions and assistance?
Yeah.
Do you mind? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
I right now, I know you guys are a job club. Is that correct?
So Nicole, yes. So Nicole, I remember you from a few months ago. Yes. Welcome back. So we are about to wrap up today's job help session. We'll be wrapping up at about 3 o'clock. So I think MJ is going to take one more volunteer and then we're wrapping. So I think you've missed most of the meeting, but I will send you the recording so you'll be able to watch what you missed.
Can we talk after this?
Sure, absolutely.
Yep. Nicole, it sounds like you're in the workplace and trying to keep quiet. Yeah, and I get that.
No. I'm home, so I just need assistance with something.
Okay.
Yep, happy to help.
Okay. Let's do one more question, and then I want to do a quick wrap up. So Here's a question. I've asked this question on occasion. I find it really elucidating. Tell me about a time you made a mistake. Tell me about a time you failed. So what they want to know about is not so much the nature of the mistake, although that is part of it. When I ask this question, what I want to know is, how do you pick yourself up after a mistake and move forward? Or do you? This would be a perfect time for a star kind of situation, where you talk about the situation that you were in, the task you were supposed to perform, the action, what happened, what went wrong, and then the action that you took to address the situation. Because that's really the main thing that you want to convey, is not that you make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, but that you dealt with it. And then there was, I put response there, it should be the result. Anybody want to try that one? This is our last question.
What type of mistake do you mean?
And so if you're interviewing for a job, I want to know, on your last job or on some job before, was there a time when you tried to do something and you failed?
Yeah, I can bring this up too.
Awesome.
Okay, I don't know what it was, but I recently, I wanted to volunteer at the Newburyport Library, and they said, I called the lady up and I said that they didn't need me, and my I had a lot of library experience on my resume, and your needs don't meet us. And I'm like, what? Only for volunteering? So I don't know if I did something wrong, because it seemed a little fishy there, you know what I mean? Just for volunteering.
So I understand the scenario that you're describing, and I can hear in your voice, and I can only imagine how frustrating it was. If I'm an interviewer and I'm thinking about hiring you either as a volunteer or into a position at my library, what's the message I'm going to get from that story?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, because that's really the main thing. What is it they're trying to learn, and what do you want them to learn? That might not, I'm wondering whether that would be the best kind of story for a time that you failed. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big failure. And I think one of the things that an interviewer would be looking for in the answer is, did you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and move forward? And so you could talk about how I was really excited about a volunteer position at my local library. I was looking forward to doing this and that at the library. And based on my experience, I thought I was a good fit. Unfortunately, they told me they didn't need any more volunteers at that time. I was really disappointed. And so I cried, we could say, I was disappointed and I was discouraged. But then I thought, well, there are other libraries, there are other places where I'm needed. So I went back to the job boards until I found another position that I wanted to apply for. So you're leaving them on a positive note. Anybody else have any comments or thoughts on it? All right, I'm going to look at the clock and realize that we only have a few minutes left. And actually, if you bear with me a second, I'm going to zip forward to the last thing that I wanted to say. And we will the slideshow hopefully from there. So can you go to there? Yes. So the key takeaways from this. Think about the question. There's a reason the interviewer asks the question. Whether they've read your resume or not, there are things that they want to learn. What is it the interviewer wants to learn? And is that exactly what you want them to learn? What is it that you want them to learn? What's the message you want to leave them with in response to that topic? Those two things may not always be exactly the same, but in the time that you have to answer the question, you can probably find a way to give them both a direct answer to what they asked and leave them with the impression you want to leave them with. Some of the tools that you have are the STAR approach: situation, task, action, and result. or the opening body conclusion. But either way, be organized in your response, because an organized verbal response to me indicates an organized mind. And for most positions, that's what one of the things an employer is looking for. Be compelling, use personal, not deeply personal, but your own stories. Be specific in your stories. Don't have pop-ups all the time. Use body language, facial expressions, use your voice. And the main thing to keep in mind is that all of these skills are best learned by practice. I'm curious, for those of you on screen, how many of you have ever learned how to play a musical instrument? I learned piano when I was a kid. Right. So the way you learned to play that instrument was by going to an orchestra and watching professionals play, right? No. The way you learned to play that instrument, however well you learned it, was by practicing. And I got to think, and my teacher always told me, the more I practiced, the better I would get. I really strongly encourage you to practice. You can practice with these questions. We'll send out the deck, so you'll get the PDF that has all of this. Practice with these questions. Find somebody in this group to partner with. Find a former coworker or a family member to partner with to answer the questions and get feedback. And practice your answers, because you can predict a lot of the questions that you'll get in the interview process. And the more you've prepared the stories that you want to tell to convey the message you want to convey, the better you're going to appear to the interview. Last thing I have to say is just happy interviewing. Don't forget about Toastmasters. I think it's really huge. But if you have any questions you want to follow up with me personally, feel free. My email address is there. And I'll turn things back over to Robert.
So MJ, wonderful job as expected. So folks, let me briefly plug next week's meeting. So let me get to the right page here. My computer likes to freeze up on me right at the wrong time. But we're meeting next Monday, September 19th at 2 o'clock via Zoom. And the topic is actually very relevant to what MJ's been doing, overcoming your fear of public speaking. And that's going to be with Lisa Ugolo. I'm not sure if Lisa is a Toastmaster, but she is the author of Delight in the Limelight, Overcome Your Fear of Being Seen and Realizing Your Dreams. And Lisa is a life coach. So we will see, and she actually hosts a TV show called Women Inspired. So we'll see Lisa next Monday, 2 o'clock via Zoom. Look for an email from me tomorrow, link to a feedback survey. Please fill that out for today's program. Link to this recording. I will include MJ's slides, as she mentioned, and there'll be information about next Monday's talk. So thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their afternoon. And Nicole, I will stay on the line for you, okay? So just wait a few moments. Thanks again,
please
MJ.
do fill out,
everybody.
Thank you. Please do fill out the feedback survey. In true Toastmasters manner, I want to know what I could do better next time. Thank you all.
Great. Let me stop recording here.